"You'll never make it," said the manager, but he had no idea who he was talking to. The office lights flickered against the dull ceiling as if they too were tired of shining on people who never seemed to notice them. Behind a desk piled with papers, a man in his 40s leaned back, arms crossed, his expression somewhere between boredom and cruelty. In front of him stood a young employee, barely in his 20s, clutching a folder of ideas he had stayed up 3 nights preparing. His name was Daniel, though in this place he was rarely called by his name. In turn, "Kid, you..." That was enough for the manager, who seemed to believe that respect was something only the powerful deserved. Daniel's voice trembled as he explained his project, a simple improvement that could save the company time and resources. He wasn't trying to be a hero, he only wanted a chance to prove that his presence mattered. But before he could finish, the manager's laugh cut through the room like broken glass. "You'll never make it," he said slowly, savoring each word like a punishment. "People like you are replaceable. Don't waste my time with this nonsense." He pushed the folder back with a dismissive word, scattering papers onto the floor. Daniel bent down to gather them, his face burning, not from shame alone, but from the silent rage of being crushed by someone who had forgotten what it was like to begin at the bottom. Outside the office, the city was alive with noise, but Daniel felt strangely invisible. The crowds rushed past him without noticing the young man whose chest carried a fresh wound made of words. He walked toward the bus stop, thinking of his mother who worked late shifts at a diner and of his younger brother still in school. They depended on him, yet here he was, told that his future was nothing. The phrase echoed in his head like a curse. "You'll never make it." That night, Daniel sat in their small apartment, a place that smelled faintly of fried food and laundry detergent. His mother was too exhausted to talk, her hands red from hours of washing dishes. His brother asked him if things at work were going well. Daniel forced a smile, not ready to let them see the cracks forming inside him. After they went to sleep, he sat by the window staring at the neon signs across the street, wondering if perhaps the manager was right. Perhaps he was destined to be nothing more than a shadow in someone else's empire. But fate has a strange way of speaking. A week later, while Daniel was eating a cheap sandwich during lunch break, an elderly janitor named Mr. Alvarez sat beside him. The man had seen decades pass inside those office walls, cleaning floors while managers came and went. "You look like someone carrying a mountain on your back," the janitor said gently. Daniel didn't mean to open up, but the kindness in the old man's eyes disarmed him. He spoke about the humiliation, about the dream of doing something meaningful, and about the cruel sentence still ringing in his ears. Mr. Alvarez listened silently, then placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Son, I've seen people rise from nothing. The ones who rise are not the loudest or the strongest. They're the ones who refuse to let someone else write their ending." Those words planted something inside Daniel, not a full-grown tree of hope, but a small seed. That night he stayed up sketching ideas again, not for the company this time, but for himself. He scribbled notes, business plans, sketches of products that only existed in his imagination. It didn't matter if they were messy. It mattered that for the first time he was building something that belonged to him. Days passed, and every insult at work only added fuel to his secret project. He borrowed old books from the library about design, marketing, and leadership. He watched tutorials late into the night, his eyes heavy but his spirit slowly awakening. Still, the memory of that office rejection haunted him. Yet strangely, it no longer felt like an ending. It felt like the beginning of a fight he had not chosen but would finish. What Daniel didn't know yet was that his life was about to take a turn no one could have predicted. All it would take was a chance encounter, a test of courage, and a truth far more powerful than the manager's insult. For in the end, those 4 words meant to crush him would become the fire that forged his destiny. And now, before we continue with Daniel's journey, I want to pause for a moment to speak directly to you who are listening. Stories like this are not just tales to pass the time, they are reminders of the battles we all face, often in silence. If at some point in your life someone has told you that you would never make it, then you already know the sting Daniel felt. This channel is not just about stories, it is about building a space where no one has to carry those wounds alone. So if this story touches your heart, I invite you not only to subscribe, but to join our circle of voices. Leave a comment, share a memory, or simply tell us where you are listening from, because here your presence matters. And together we remind each other that none of us are replaceable. Daniel's days at the company became heavier after that humiliating meeting, but something inside him had shifted. He no longer walked through the doors just to complete tasks and keep his head down. Instead, each insult, each dismissive glance from the manager became a quiet reminder of the promise he had made to himself. that he would not let another person dictate his worth. He continued to do his job because the rent had to be paid and his family depended on the paycheck. But every night he carried home not only fatigue but also determination. His notebooks filled with sketches and plans, none of which seemed impressive at first glance, but they were his. They were seeds that no one else could see growing, not even his mother, who sometimes asked why he stayed up so late with the lamp burning long after midnight. What fueled him most was not ambition for wealth but the memory of his brother's question. "Are things going well at work?" That small, innocent voice carried a weight that even the cruelest words from the manager could not erase. Daniel wanted to show his brother that hope was not a fairy tale. He wanted to prove that even when the world pushes you down, you can stand taller than before. Still, the road was far from easy. Bills piled up, and sometimes Daniel had to skip meals so that his brother could eat more. His shoes wore thin, and the winter wind cut through his jacket, but he walked through the city streets imagining a future that only he could see. He would stop in front of shop windows, looking at the products displayed and thinking, if they could be created, then so can mine. That thought kept him warm on nights when the radiator in their apartment groaned but delivered little heat. The turning point came one evening when Daniel stayed late at work. Most employees had already left, and the corridors were quiet except for the echo of his own footsteps. In the break room, he found Mr. Alvarez cleaning tables. The old janitor smiled knowingly as if waiting for him. "Still carrying that mountain?" he asked. Daniel hesitated, then pulled from his bag one of his sketches. A simple design for an affordable, foldable desk that could fit in small apartments like his own. Alvarez studied it carefully, then nodded with a seriousness Daniel didn't expect. "This," he said, "could change lives for people who have little space but big dreams. Don't hide it in notebooks. Build it." The words lit a fire stronger than any insult could extinguish. Daniel began saving every spare coin, sacrificing small comforts to gather materials. He collected scraps of wood from construction sites, metal parts from discarded furniture, and tools borrowed from neighbors who barely knew him but trusted his sincerity. Nights turned into early mornings as he worked silently in the narrow kitchen, the sound of hammering wrapped in blankets so as not to wake his family. Slowly, piece by piece, the foldable desk took form. The first version was rough, the wood uneven and the hinges stiff, but when he set it up in his tiny room and placed his notebooks on it, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in months: pride. Not the hollow kind that depends on recognition, but the quiet pride of knowing he had turned an idea into reality. He tested it again and again, improving the balance, sanding the edges, painting it with leftover paint that a neighbor had thrown away. By the third version, the desk looked presentable enough to be shown outside the walls of his apartment. Yet fear still lingered. The manager's voice echoed in his mind, "You'll never make it." Each time Daniel considered presenting his creation to someone, doubt tightened around his chest. Don't take him seriously. He was just an underpaid employee from the back of an office, a boy carrying responsibility far heavier than his years. But then he remembered Alvarez's words, "Don't hide it in notebooks." That phrase became his anthem. One Saturday, Daniel carried the foldable desk on the bus to a small community market where local artisans sold crafts and furniture. Surrounded by colorful stands and the hum of conversations, he set up his desk timidly, unsure if anyone would even notice. At first, people passed by without stopping. But then a young mother carrying a baby stroller paused. She looked at the desk, tested how it folded, and her eyes widened. "This could fit in my apartment," she said. She asked the price, and though Daniel stammered nervously, she bought it on the spot. It wasn't just a sale, it was validation. Someone saw value in what he had created. Word spread quickly. A teacher bought one for his small studio, then recommended it to colleagues. A student saved money to purchase one, grateful for the chance to study in a cramped dorm. Within weeks, Daniel's weekends at the market became busier. He still worked at the company during the week, enduring the cold stares of his manager, but inside he carried a secret victory. Each insult now felt powerless compared to the growing list of customers who believed in his invention. Still, success brought new challenges. He struggled to keep up with demand, often working until dawn to finish orders. His hands grew calloused, his back ached, but every completed desk felt like a step toward proving the world wrong. His mother began to notice the difference too. Though she didn't fully understand where the money came from, she saw the light returning to his eyes. His brother bragged at school, saying, "My brother builds things that make life easier." For Daniel, that was worth more than any paycheck. But shadows linger even in the brightest seasons. The manager eventually heard rumors of Daniel's weekend sales and mocked him openly in front of colleagues. "So now you're a carpenter selling toys at markets?" That's your future?" Laughter filled the room, but Daniel no longer bowed his head. He simply answered, "It's a future I'm building myself." The words shocked even him. For the first time, he realized he no longer feared the man who once crushed him. What Daniel didn't know was that his path was about to cross with someone who could either destroy everything or open doors wider than he had ever imagined. A customer unlike any other was about to appear, and with them, a test greater than any insult a manager could hurl. The market was busier than usual that morning, filled with voices calling out prices, children tugging on their parents' sleeves, and the scent of roasted coffee drifting through the cool air. Daniel had arrived earlier than most, setting up his modest stand with the same nervous care as always. His foldable desks leaned against the wall, polished as best as his limited tools allowed, and his notebook lay open, ready to take down any orders. To passers-by, he might have looked like just another vendor trying to survive, but inside him lived a storm of emotions: hope, fear, exhaustion, and the unshakable determination to prove that his life meant more than the words thrown at him by the manager who still lurked like a shadow in his memory. For the first hour, sales were slow. A few people stopped, admired his desks, but walked away without buying. Daniel tried not to let discouragement creep in, reminding himself of the mother with the stroller who had believed in him weeks ago. Just as doubt began to press against his chest again, a man in a long coat approached. He was older, with silver hair, sharp eyes, and the posture of someone used to making decisions that affected many lives. He didn't smile or make small talk. Instead, he folded and unfolded the desk several times, testing its balance, the strength of its hinges, and the ease of movement. Then he looked at Daniel and asked simply, "Did you design this yourself?" Daniel nodded, his palms sweating. "Yes, sir. Every part of it." The man's expression remained unreadable. "I run a small chain of bookstores. Space is always a problem, and this could help us. Do you have the capacity to produce 50 of these in 2 months?" The question nearly knocked the air out of Daniel's lungs. 50? He had never built more than 3 in a single week, and that had already stretched him to his limits. Yet he also knew opportunities like this did not knock twice. He swallowed hard and said, "I can do it." His voice was steadier than he felt. The man extended a card. "My name is Mr. Donovan. Call my office Monday morning. If the quality matches what I see here, we'll do business." And just like that, he disappeared into the crowd, leaving Daniel staring at the small rectangle of cardboard that now burned in his hand like a spark of destiny. That night he could not sleep. The promise of the order filled him with both excitement and terror. 50 desks. How could he possibly manage that with borrowed tools and scraps collected from the streets? His mother worried when she saw his restlessness. "Daniel, don't take on something that will crush you," she said gently. But he shook his head. "This is it, Mom. This is the door I've been waiting for. I can't walk away now." The next weeks became a test of willpower he had never known before. Daniel begged for leftover wood from carpenters, struck small deals with hardware store owners, and convinced a neighbor to let him use their garage as a workshop in exchange for repairing broken furniture. He worked before dawn, after his office job, and long into the night. His body screamed for rest, but every time his arms grew too heavy, he thought of Mr. Donovan's sharp eyes and the chance to prove himself. Still, setbacks came. Hinges broke. Paint peeled. Measurements went wrong. More than once he considered giving up, the manager's voice sneering in his mind, reminding him that failure was his destiny. But then Mr. Alvarez stopped by the garage, bringing warm food and quiet encouragement. "Every mistake is proof you are trying," the old man said. "Don't fear them. Fear the day you stop trying." Those words kept Daniel moving. 2 months later, against every odd, the 50 desks stood completed, lined up like an army of silent witnesses to his struggle. They were not perfect, but they were strong, practical, and designed with love for people who needed solutions. When Mr. Donovan's team arrived to inspect them, Daniel's heart pounded like a drum. They unfolded, tested, and checked each piece with professional eyes. At the end, Donovan himself nodded. "We'll take them." He signed the first contract of Daniel's life, and in that moment, the young man felt the invisible chains of the manager's curse begin to break. The money from the deal didn't make him rich, but it gave him breathing room. He bought better tools, repaid small debts, and even surprised his mother by fixing their old dining table so they could sit together without its legs wobbling. His brother's pride grew louder, telling everyone at school that his sibling was a builder, a creator. For Daniel, that was wealth enough. But success is rarely the end of the story. With recognition came attention, and not all of it kind. His manager at the office found out about the contract and mocked him in front of colleagues again. So the carpenter thinks he's a businessman now? Let's see how long before he falls on his face. This time, however, Daniel didn't shrink. He looked the man in the eye and said calmly, "I may fall, but I will fall moving forward. And you'll still be standing in the same place, telling people they'll never make it." The office went silent, and for the first time the manager had no reply. What Daniel couldn't know yet was that his journey was just beginning. The small contract with Donovan was a seed, and seeds grow into forests when watered by persistence. Ahead lay greater challenges, competitors who would try to steal his ideas, nights of despair when exhaustion threatened to break him, and unexpected betrayals that would test not only his skill but also his heart. Yet each step, each struggle, was shaping him into someone far stronger than the frightened boy who once bent down to gather scattered papers on an office floor. Orders rarely arrive like a neat line of figures on a clean page. They show up like unexpected weather. After the first bookstore contract, Daniel began receiving emails from small studios, cramped clinics, and tiny apartments looking for space where there wasn't any. Each message carried a different story: a nurse studying after midnight, a street vendor planning a new life, a student sharing a room with two cousins, and each one reminded Daniel why he had started. He answered them all with care, promising realistic timelines and refusing to overcharge, because he knew what it felt like to count coins at the end of the week. That choice built trust faster than any advertisement could have done, but it also pushed him to a limit he had never faced. There were days when the smell of sandalwood clung to his skin even after a shower, when his hands shook while holding a cup of coffee, when his eyes stung from varnish and lack of sleep. He learned the hard rhythm of small enterprise. Create, deliver, learn, repeat, always a step ahead of the next request and a step behind the rest he needed. Trouble arrived quietly at first, disguised as flattery. At the market, a smooth-talking stranger praised the design, asked too many questions, and left with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. 2 weeks later, a near-identical desk appeared online under a different name, cut at the corners to be cheaper, built faster and rougher, sold with loud promises that didn't mention safety. People who couldn't afford Daniel's careful build started buying the imitation, and soon the copycat product spread like spilled ink. It would have been easy to rage against it, to file complaints he couldn't afford, to waste nights composing angry posts that would be liked, shared, and forgotten. Mr. Alvarez, who had watched generations of workers learn the difference between pride and ego, spoke softly, "Protect your people first, then your idea." Daniel took the advice to heart. He wrote clear safety guides, added honest videos showing how to use the desk without injury, improved the hinges with a small locking catch, and posted real stories from customers who used the desk to read to their children, study for exams, or paint in the single hour of quiet they had before dawn. He didn't fight the copy with louder noise, he answered with proof of care. Even so, the copycat stung. It forced Daniel to confront a question that knocks on every builder's door: who am I if they take what I made? The nights grew longer as he tested new angles, tried soft close joints, drafted attachments that could transform the desk into a standing station or a compact easel. The failures stacked beside the successes until the floor of the garage looked like a record of stubbornness. Shavings curled like ribbon, paper patterns torn and taped back together, hardware tried and discarded. He learned to pause before frustration crossed the line into harshness. When his brother wandered in asking if he could help, Daniel didn't push him away. He taught him how to hold a measuring tape steady, how to keep fingers safe near the blade, how to sweep the floor in long, careful strokes. Work turned into lessons about patience and attention, and the little garage became the kind of classroom Daniel wished he had found at his day job. The office, meanwhile, grew colder. The manager, irritated by Daniel's newfound steadiness, started handing him the least pleasant tasks, publicly reminding him of the hierarchy every time he dared to look hopeful. It would have humiliated the Daniel of that first week, but the man who now walked those fluorescent halls had built something with his own hands. He moved through the office with quiet focus, meeting deadlines, greeting coworkers who were used to being ignored, sharing small tips about organization learned from the brutal honesty of the workshop. People began to notice the difference, and a few started bringing their own dreams to the lunch table. An idea for a small bakery, a plan for graphic design classes, a proposal to open a repair stand for old phones. Hope has its own scent. It spreads without permission. Then came the setback that tested his core. A delivery to the bookstores went wrong. A storm hit the highway, the transport van slid into a guardrail, and several desks arrived with dents and scratches. The chain could have canceled everything, and the copycat brand lurked ready to step in. Instead of defending himself, Daniel took responsibility. He sent an apology before they asked for one, offered a partial refund, and promised replacements within a strict window. It meant losing sleep and money. It meant starting again under pressure that made his jaws ache. It meant his mother placing a cup of soup by the workbench in silence, the unspoken faith between them heavy and tender. When the replacements arrived in the stores on time, Donovan didn't praise him. He did something better. He expanded the order for the next quarter and requested a second design, a compact reading table for children's corners. Trust doesn't always sound like applause. Sometimes it looks like repeat work. Even victories come with a cost. Daniel's exhaustion started to show in the way he forgot simple things. The kettle left on too long, the bus stop missed, the drifting mind during dinner. One night, he sat on the floor of the garage, back against the cool wall, palms over his face, the smell of pine and oil sharp in his nose. The copies kept multiplying. The deadlines kept advancing. The great dream of freedom felt, for a moment, like one more chain made of promises he had to keep for everyone but himself. In that quiet, his brother placed a small note in his hand, a child's drawing of a desk with a caption written in uneven letters. This made space for me. It wasn't a marketing line. It was the map back to his why. He breathed, stood up, and tightened the next hinge. What he didn't know that week was that the copycat seller had made a mistake. In rushing to cut costs, they used cheap bolts that sheared underweight. A video went viral showing one of those desks folding on a student mid-exam. It wasn't Daniel's product, but online anger doesn't always read labels. He could have stayed silent and watched a competitor burn. He didn't. He posted a clear safety message naming his brand, showing the difference in build, offering free inspections for any desk, copy or original, that looked unsafe. People noticed the uncommon decency. Some returned to buy from him. Others sent grateful messages even if they couldn't afford to switch brands yet. Meanwhile, the bookstore chain put up small signs, certified safe by our partners. A crisis meant to drown him became a bridge toward the customers he wanted to serve. By the end of that season, the garage had changed. On one wall hung sketches for future versions. On a shelf sat a neat line of samples marked with dates and lessons learned. The space felt like a journal written in wood and steel. Daniel had moved from survival to direction, not by shouting down his rivals, but by caring louder than they could copy. He slept, finally, the sleep of a worker who knows tomorrow will be hard and walks toward it anyway. Growth is rarely a straight climb. It comes in plateaus that ask for patience and leaps that demand courage. With steady orders flowing, Daniel faced a new set of decisions that had nothing to do with glue joints or varnish. He needed help. Real help. Not just a cousin for a weekend or a neighbor lending a drill, but steady hands that could share the burden and the pride. Hiring felt terrifying. Wages weren't numbers to him. They were groceries, bus fares, school shoes. But he also knew the math of staying small. Too many hours, too much risk, too little time to improve the craft. He made a list of tasks he could teach quickly and those he needed to keep for himself, then visited a community center where people looked for honest work. He didn't ask for perfect resumes. He asked for attention, care, and the willingness to learn. 3 people joined over the next month. Lydia, who had once stitched leather bags and had the patience of a stone. Marco, who had repaired bicycles since childhood and understood balance like a second language. Ibrahim, quiet and careful, who could read a blueprint as if it were a story. Daniel set clear rules: safety first, no cutting corners, no lying to customers, and then he did something he had never received in the office. He listened. The team rearranged the small space together, built jigs that made the work safer, shared ideas that shaved minutes off repeated motions without losing quality. Slow days became research, busy days became choreography. Leadership taught Daniel another lesson: trust moves both ways. When a batch came out slightly uneven due to a measurement error, he didn't hide it or blame a worker. He gathered everyone and walked through the process until they all understood what had gone wrong. When a customer sent a note praising the smooth finish on a desk, he read it aloud with names, not just numbers. When the first end-of-month payments went out, he placed each envelope in a steady hand and said, "This is your craft on someone's table." Pride spread like warmth in a cold room. Beyond the garage, the city tilted. Rents rose on one block and fell on another. A new transit line made deliveries to distant neighborhoods easier. A charity asked Daniel to donate 2 desks for a study room. He delivered 6 and asked for nothing in return except a photograph of the room in use. That image, 3 kids leaning over notebooks, elbows touching, brows furrowed in concentration, became the only advertisement he cared to frame. He was building more than furniture. He was building places where thought could rest. Then the phone call arrived that shook the old office walls. A mid-level leader from Daniel's company invited him to present a space-saving proposal for a regional initiative. It smelled like the manager's idea, dressed up as corporate innovation. The invitation wasn't an apology, it was an attempt to borrow Daniel's newfound credibility as if it had always belonged to them. The younger Daniel might have accepted for the approval alone. The Daniel who had built calluses with his hopes said yes for a different reason, to say goodbye properly. On the day of the presentation, he walked into the same conference room where the words, "You'll never make it," had landed like a stamp on his forehead. He placed a sample desk at the front, unfolded it with steady hands, and spoke slowly about small spaces and large dreams, about mothers studying late, brothers building futures, artists who needed just 1 square meter of dignity to begin. He didn't mention the insult. He didn't mention the nights when tears tasted like sawdust. He stated his terms clearly. He would sell at a fair price, he would not license cheaply, and he would retain control over safety. Questions buzzed, but the room's weight shifted when workers from different departments asked practical details with genuine curiosity. The manager watched, face drawn into a thin line. After the meeting, in the hallway where fluorescent light met dull carpet, the manager approached with a smile that never reached his eyes. "So, Carpenter," he said, lowering his voice, "looks like you've made a little name. Remember who gave you your first job?" Daniel didn't flinch. "I do," he replied. "And I remember who tried to make that job my ceiling." The words did not carry anger, they carried a door finally closing. He turned and left, not triumphant, not dramatic, simply done. The company eventually placed a modest order, and Daniel treated them like any other client. No discount for their history, no punishment either. Professionalism felt like freedom. The team in the garage celebrated with a modest dinner, paper plates balanced on knees, music low enough for conversation. They spoke about goals that no longer began with survival. A larger workspace with windows, a training program for teenagers who didn't see college as their only path, a small fund to repair the workstations of people who couldn't afford maintenance. But growth also revealed the limits of one person's endurance. A fever knocked Daniel flat for a week. The crew, rather than press him to return early, split his tasks, kept the schedule, and hung a note on the workshop door, "Closed for care, open for tomorrow." Customers did not flee. They sent messages of patience that felt like small miracles. The world he had been building was sturdy enough to stand without his hands for a few days. That, more than any check or compliment, told him he was leading well. By the end of that quarter, Daniel had something he could not fold and place on a shelf. He had a reputation, not for being the cheapest but for being the one who showed up, told the truth, and left things better than he found them. Reputation, he learned, is the currency that buys time to do things right. Winter returned with a sharper edge, and with it came an invitation that felt like a circle closing. Mr. Donovan called to say a regional fair was featuring creators who improved everyday life, and he wanted Daniel's team at the front of his booth. The fair was loud and bright, crowded with inventions that claimed to change the world in 10 seconds. Daniel's desks did not shout. They waited for the right hands to touch them, for the right eyes to imagine them in a room that was too small, in a life that was too busy, in a dream that needed a corner to grow. People lined up, not for spectacle, but for the relief of a solution that respected their reality. In that river of faces, the manager appeared again, not alone this time but with a young new hire trailing him like a shadow. He stepped forward, lips ready to twist, but the new hire spoke first, eyes on the desk. "I live in a tiny room," the young man said quietly. "How much weight can it hold if I use it for both laptop and sketchbooks?" Daniel answered with measurements, not memories. He explained the tests, the reinforcements, the safe limits. He turned to the new hire, not the manager, and said, "If your pay is tight, we have a plan that splits the cost over months with no added fee." The manager cleared his throat, searching for a place to plant his authority. None appeared. The new hire paid, shook Daniel's hand, and left with more than wood and hinges. He left with a small piece of room to become himself. The manager, suddenly irrelevant, drifted into the crowd. Later, when the fair lights dimmed, Daniel walked the aisles alone. He thought about the thin line between being unseen and being unbroken, about how a single sentence can become a wall or a ladder depending on what you do after it. He thought of Mr. Alvarez sweeping halls bright with the fatigue of ordinary workers and of his mother falling asleep in a chair, fork still in her hand. He thought of his brother learning to measure twice. And he understood that his story wasn't a revenge plot. It was a long, patient making of a life where dignity didn't need permission. The team moved to a larger space the following spring, windows opened to a patch of sky. They set up a simple training corner, 3 stools, a whiteboard with smudged diagrams, a pegboard hung with tools labeled in neat handwriting. Teenagers came on Saturdays. Some shy, some angry, all carrying that familiar mixture of hope and self-defense. They learned more than cutting angles. They learned to arrive on time, to put things back where they belonged, to admit when a measurement went wrong and fix it without shame. Lydia led a class on finishes as if she were teaching a language. Marco explained balance using bicycles. Ibrahim taught quiet focus by example. Daniel watched them take over tasks he once guarded, and instead of fear he felt the pride of a farmer who finally trusts the field to bear fruit. One evening, as the sun fell behind the warehouse roofs, Mr. Alvarez appeared at the doorway in his good jacket, hair combed, smile soft. He had retired at last. The team stopped, wiped hands, and made a ring around him. Daniel presented a small plaque, hand-carved, with a line the old man had given him in that first storm of doubt. "Don't hide it in notebooks." Alvarez ran his fingers over the letters as if they were a familiar road. "You listened," he said. "And look what listening built." Not every day was bright. A supplier closed unexpectedly. A shipment arrived late. A batch of hinges arrived flawed. But the difference now was not in the obstacles. It was in the people facing them. Problems were named early, plans adjusted without panic, truths told cleanly. The workshop held its rhythm. Saws singing, Sanders murmuring, voices low and focused. On a back table, a small frame displayed the child's note that had brought Daniel back from the edge. "This made space for me." On the anniversary of that first market sale, Daniel wrote a letter he never sent. He addressed it to the manager but saved it for himself. He did not list grievances. He did not recount insults. He wrote about the cost of underestimation, how it wastes talent, crushes beginners, and hollows out the future of any place that confuses power with wisdom. Then he put the letter away and went back to work, because the best argument he could make was the room he kept building for people who needed space and respect in equal measure. Before we close this chapter, let me speak to you, the one listening in your kitchen, on a crowded bus, in a quiet room between shifts. Maybe someone has told you what the manager told Daniel. Maybe they said it with a smirk, or with numbers, or with silence that landed like a verdict. Hear me, your value is not a debate and your path is not a vote. Your work may be small at first, your tools borrowed, your schedule ugly. But dignity grows in the hands, and care has a way of calling other hands to help. If this story gave you a single degree of warmth, I want to ask, not as a slogan, not as a trick, but as a neighbor, come closer. Be part of our circle. Subscribe if this kind of story keeps you company. Tell us in the comments what corner you're trying to clear, what idea you're tired of hiding in notebooks, what sentence you're ready to turn into a ladder. Your voice will not disappear here. We read, we answer, we remember, and we build together.